What is up, Epic 7 fam? Pat here with another video, and in this one we will be talking about how to play World Arena. This will be the first in a multi-part video series. This specific video will be focusing on two topics. The first of which is the competitive mindset as well as some competitive philosophies. This will serve as a foundation or learning experience for players who have no or little competitive gaming experience. The second half of this video will be talking about necessary roles that I feel like you will need to fill in order to climb RTA. I will also be giving you some unit suggestions to fill said roles. There will be no ML5 stars, by the way, mentioned in those roles, so you can expect a lot of RGBs as well as a couple of ML4 stars. So, with that out of the way, let's get into the video. So let's talk about competitive mindset. More specifically, I want to talk about my personal competitive background as well as my personal competitive philosophies in hopes that maybe you can relate to them or they may be somehow useful to you. For those of you guys who only know me from Epic 7, you may not know that I used to be not only a content creator but a top player for the Dragon Ball Super card game. I had multiple national top cut finishes in that game, and I attribute a lot of my success to adhering to some of the things that I'm going to touch upon on this video. Not everything, but a lot of the things that I do say, by the way, are grounded in the Book of Five Rings written by Miyamoto Musashi. If you've never read that book, excellent supplemental reading, by the way. It's a bit abstract, but I really think you can apply it to quite a number of things. You may not agree with a lot of the things that I talk about in this video, but I think there's a lot that you can still learn from it. And honestly, learning is one of the best things that any aspiring player can have. You should always be willing to learn anything. And the first thing you're going to learn is that you're going to lose a lot. And that is honestly okay. You may be afraid or nervous about playing World Arena, but honestly, that's okay. No one is great the first time they do anything in their life. You need lots of repetition and lots of practice, so don't be afraid to play a lot of games. The more games you play, the more natural it'll feel as time goes on. And you should also take your time. You can breathe, honestly. I know I'm personally guilty of this one, but you really should be also thinking about your moves rather than just jamming them. You can win more games if you honestly take the time, relax. Don't, jump the gun and just do the first thing that comes into your head. Think about your moves. If you just, YOLO the S3 rather than thinking about the move, you might end up costing yourselves more matches. So again, the more you play, the better you're going to be. The other major takeaway, like we said, learning is important. And honestly, you should try to learn something from every single game that you play. And one of the best ways you can do that is actually the battle log feature here on the menu. You can literally just click battle log, scroll down, find a match you lost, go to details, look at the actual draft, and think to yourself, did I pick incorrectly? Did I ban incorrectly? As long as you are asking yourselves those questions, you're probably in a good spot and on your way to improving. And if you're not really sure, ask your friends, ask your guildmates, or even ask your favorite streamer, things like that. Always be looking at every loss as an opportunity to learn. The second section that I want to talk about is that knowledge and research are super important, and it's fitting because in this section, speaking of research, we are going to be talking about the character Researcher Carrot, who studies a lot. So yes, studying is really, really important in any competitive game that you actually are trying to play. The more things you know about said game, the less likely you are to ever be caught off guard by anything. You should constantly be thinking and asking yourself, how do I counter or beat specific things, especially things like Researcher Carrot that are incredibly popular and almost assuredly going to show up. So, you have to start asking yourself, what is the thing you're most likely going to see, and how do you beat it? And you can do that by going into the hero journal and actually looking at a character's skills. What makes Carrot so powerful is her soul burn on her S3, giving a ton of burn stacks and damage to the enemy team. With the extra turn on the S1 doing a detonate, she's basically going to single target, kill somebody, and then leave the rest of the team in shambles due to the high damage from the burn. Additionally, she has an S2 that gives a barrier and a rune passive that makes it difficult to kill her in one hit. So it's, a kind of a tough nut to crack, but if you're familiar with the actual pool of heroes in Epic 7, you might be able to actually surmise a counter. And one of those counters is actually Kisei. And when you think about it, it makes a lot of sense. Kisei is blue. Blue is naturally good against red. Her S1, Full Moon Scythe, does 70% extra damage to targets when they are buffed, which means that if the carrot has a barrier, she can do a ton of damage and just completely rip through her and possibly kill her in one hit, especially due to the soul burn that she has. She also has Nocturne, which can prevent the carrot's S3 from going off. And if you take a look at her actual EE, she not only is going to get a bunch of extra speed, but she will actually strip that barrier as well. Speaking of speed, she is so fast that almost assuredly the Kisei will go before the carrot and guarantee that she's completely useless. You may not be aware of it, but this character checks all the boxes. And, you learn this through reading the hero journal and figuring out what every character in the game does and coming up with your own opinion on what their best usage is. Continuing on with the topic of research, if you're not already, you should 100% be watching other people play this game, whether that's through the spectator function in-game, through streams on Twitch, or even replays on YouTube. But when you do watch, you should not be just passively watching. And what I mean by that is you should be actively watching and engaging your brain. More specifically, you should be inquisitive. You should be asking yourself, if you were in one of the players' shoes, what would you do? And then just sit back and see what happens. If it works for them and you thought the same thing, that's awesome. If it worked for them and it wasn't what you thought, ask yourself why. Why does it work for them, but it's not necessarily the decision you would have made? And most importantly of all, you should be asking yourself, if it doesn't work out for the streamer, why did it not work out? And this is going to lead into the next section, which is, if you've followed my channel for any amount of time or any of my content in competitive card games, you would know that I always caution against copying other people. Groupthink is potentially dangerous. There is a time and a place for things like net decking, which is copying, the trends that are prevalent in the metagame. But there are pitfalls to it. If you guys don't know, groupthink or net decking is basically this, notion that just because someone else, or everyone else I should say, is doing something, that you should be doing it as well. What you should be doing is what you think works best for you, what works well for you. Just because someone on Twitch or even somebody like me on YouTube tells you to do something, don't just do it blindly. Ask yourself questions, formulate your own opinion, and then decide to follow it. If a streamer tells you that Arbiter Vildred or any other character in this game is broken and that you should always first pick them, you should figure out why. Don't just do it. Is it because players at low levels can't beat them? Or is it because he's really broken with this specific build and he actually, might need a nerf or something like that? You should be asking yourself, what does this character on your screen do? How do you beat him? And, if you can't beat him, then, should you ban him? Should you just pick him and play him instead? Honestly, I give props to a player like Lakari, because recently he's been playing, let me see if I can pull her up here real fast. He's been playing Bloodblade Karin, I should say. And that's awesome. And he's using it specifically to counter bad matchups that he is having difficulty with, rather than going along with something that another content creator with him. That's awesome. That's the kind of mindset that you should have and be looking for if you are trying to improve at a game. Figure out what, is that raw, untapped thing, that next thing that no one else is thinking of, which leads us into our next section, which is number 3, unpredictability is really good. Going back to referencing Musashi, one of the things that we learn from the book is actually that an off-balance or, unprepared opponent is usually pretty easy to defeat. If you're unpredictable and your opponent doesn't see a move coming, you're probably going to win. It's one of the most important aspects to succeeding in any form of PvP in this game, whether it's RTA, Guild Wars, regular arena. If you catch people off guard, you are probably going to win, and this is especially true at lower levels of play. So if you're trying to climb, having something that is like a secret weapon that nobody sees coming is a huge boon to you. Honestly, ask yourself, how do you think people feel the first time they ran into something like a counter set Arbiter Vildred or like a counter set Landy? They were expecting a squishy, somewhat fast DPS, and instead they were greeted with a tanky character that they couldn't outright kill in one hit. The inverse is also true. How do you think people feel the first time they see a blazing fast DPS or a DPS that's a lot faster than they initially, think it's going to be? I'm sure everyone who has played any amount of PvP in this game goes, wow, that character's a lot faster than I thought they were going to be. Take my Sirmia, for example. A lot of people play Sirmia as this really slow character with like auxiliary lots in PvP usually, to kind of do like a sweep, or, maybe it's like only 170 or 180 speed. Some people do not expect your Sirmia to be 225, 230, 240 speed. The whole purpose of the Sirmia is actually to catch you off guard and be fast and nuke that Landy or other damage dealer that you might have on the first turn. So I go in, my opener basically sets them up for Sirmia to tee off and just takes them out of the fight, and I basically win the game super easily. If your opponent doesn't expect that move, you're just going to win, and it's really, again, really exploitable at low level play, because the less experienced players simply don't know how to recognize these patterns, and you can basically exploit them. And we'll talk about that in the other video that I'm going to do following up on this one, which is specifically dedicated to only the draft phase of RTA. So now let's get into the meat and potatoes. This is probably the stuff you're all here to see, and this is what characters you should have, what roles you should be able to fill, as well as some example characters that you should probably have geared when going into RTA. I want to leave the nitty-gritty of actually doing the draft section, as well as some pointers in the actual game itself, for another separate video, because there's a lot of prep work, as you can tell. So this rest of the video is just going to be about characters that I think you should probably have built and roles that you should have in order to succeed in RTA. One of the biggest factors for players in RTA is how deep their box is. And what I mean is, how many characters do you have built? The more characters that you have 6-starred, geared, mulligored, and ready to go, the easier it's going to be for you to climb. For new and intermediate players that are just trying to get to something like Master to be able to get the skin for the season, you want to probably have somewhere between 10 and 12 characters realistically built. And when I say built characters, what I mean is the characters are most likely 6-starred. Not everyone needs to be 6-starred. Some characters are fine at 50, especially if they are just supporting characters. Think of things like auxiliary lots. But for your tanks and your damage dealers, you probably want them to be 60. For most characters, you're going to want them to be on some form of 70 to 85 gear minimum. For your damage dealers, you want them on the absolute best possible gear you have. Obviously, not everyone has a bunch of I-90 gear, especially if you're new or just starting out. So you definitely are going to want to try to put as much of your I-90 and 85, and if you only have like 75s, just whatever's the best, put it on the damage dealers. And that's because the damage dealers are your win conditions. They are how you win the game. If your team has no damage, there's a very high chance you're not winning the game unless you just somehow have like an insanely good stall comp. So yeah, the minimum things I think you would need to do well are 8 to 12 heroes, probably 10 to 12 heroes, and they fall into a couple of categories. I will explain what each of them are in their own separate section, as well as put up on the screen a bunch of examples for you to take note of. If I go too fast with the slides, feel free to pause and read the slides. I'm trying to keep the video length as short as possible. So the categories that we need to have in order to do well in RTA is we need mitigation tanks, specifically 2 to 3 of them. These are things that usually hold Aureus, which is arguably the best artifact in the game, as well as Adamant Shield. They are trying to mitigate the incoming damage and protect the rest of your team. You want 3 to 4 damage dealers that are well built. Ideally, you would like 2 for each color. So if you have a really deep box and you've been playing for a long time and you don't have World Arena, you'd ideally like 2 of each color, but 3 to 4 is perfectly fine. Just in case like one gets either taken or banned, you're going to need at least like 3 to 4, like I said. You want 2 utility characters. Those are characters that can either debuff, buff, provide you, some kind of bonus to help you try to win the game. They are not damage dealers. They are not tanks. They are something completely else. The last 2 categories, you're going to need 2 characters that are very good against control teams, and you're going to need 2 characters that are very good against cleave teams, so that way you cannot be banned out. And I'll explain those when we get to their own separate section. So let's dive into the specifics. The first thing that we have to talk about is tanks. For most players who are playing Epic 7, especially the new players and the intermediate players who are just getting into World Arena, you probably don't have the best speed gear, you probably don't have all the broken ML5s and the broken limited units, so that means you're probably not going to be a cleave or a control player. For most players, I feel like you're going to sit in a bruiser / tank style gameplay, and that's fine. You might find it boring, but it's incredibly powerful and has the tools to deal with any team, and part of that is the Aureus artifact. Aureus is super powerful and, in my opinion, the best artifact in all of Epic 7. For this reason, I think you should draft at least one knight holding an Aureus in every game. I feel like your chances of winning will go up significantly because of it. For free-to-play players, Adventurer Raz is easily the best choice for you. You should try to have a second Aureus holder if you can, at least one, and try and draft it every single game. Additionally, Adamant Shield stacks with Aureus to further mitigate damage. Falcon or Clury is going to end up being the best option for a lot of free-to-play players, but on your screen I will be showing you a bunch of Aureus and Adamant Shield holders that are very good, and you can draft these in almost every single match and feel pretty good about it. The next section is damage dealers. I feel like this section is pretty self-explanatory. You need damage to win games. Ideally, you would like to have 2 well-built damage dealers of each color. But I realize for a lot of newer and intermediate players, you probably don't have access to 2 damage dealers that are good for RTA for each color. So for that reason, I think it is a-okay for a lot of players to just have 3 to 4 in the early stages and try to pick at least 2 of them every single game. For free-to-play options, the best one is obviously Researcher Carrot, unless she gets nerfed, a couple days after this video comes out. So yeah, that is definitely your best option, but look at the 5 stars that you have and the Moonlight 4 stars that you have and see if any of them are on the screen right now in front of you, and you can probably try to build something using the recommendations on the screen and try to make something work. But yeah, have at least 3 to 4 of these. Ideally, you would like to have at least 2 of each color. After talking about damage dealers, let's talk about utility characters. Utility is basically a catch-all term I'm using for any character that is not a tank and not a damage dealer. These are the characters that are either there to help you get first in any given game, heal your team up, buff your team, debuff the enemy team, literally anything you can use to get a foothold and an advantage and win the game off of. These characters, a lot of them are especially good if they are built fast. So that is super useful to note. Also, a lot of Soul Weavers fall in this section. I will specifically be leaving out the ones that are good against control in order to keep the list short. But again, take a look at which ones there are and see which ones work for you. Now let's talk about characters that excel versus control. If you don't know what control is, it is a type of team composition that revolves around either sleeping, stunning, or slowing down your entire team so that you never get a turn. If you don't take a turn, there's a good chance you're probably not winning this game, so that's what opponents are trying to do to you when they play this type of composition. Characters that are good against control are usually ones that can remove lots of debuffs from your team. You're going to want to build those characters with very high effect resistance as much as you can, and definitely make use of the resist set from Banshee. In the lower tiers, I think 100 is probably a pretty good starting point, but ideally you'd want 150 or higher. As you approach the higher tiers such as Challenger and Champion, you're going to want to have 200 or higher on a lot of these characters. If you do not have high effect resistance gear and there's just not enough time for you to farm it at the end of the season, consider using characters that have strong self-cleansing abilities, or make use of the Timeless Anchor artifact that's a 3-star. It's particularly good on specific bruisers. Think of things like Ravi or Alencia. The last type of character we're going to talk about are the characters that excel against cleave. If you don't know what cleave is, it's a type of team composition very similar to control, and that it's trying to make it so that you can't actually take a turn and win the game. The difference is cleave teams are trying to buff 1 to 2 specific damage dealers so that they can use an attack and wipe out basically your entire team. In low ratings, I feel like 100% you will run into quite a number of cleave teams because they assume you simply don't know how to deal with them. If you can make a tanky team that is very difficult to cleave through, I feel like you will have a lot of success and get that gold or masters rating very, very easily. On your screen, you'll also see some very, very good, options to try to combat cleave. If you don't have them, again, that is a-okay. You should probably, though, try to pick your tankiest characters against cleave and try to weather the storm. Cleave teams traditionally do not have a lot of defense, and they are basically made of paper. Even a team full of knights that have a bunch of protection can probably end up taking the game if they just simply can't kill you. Alright, so let's talk about the elephant in the room, Moonlight 5 stars. The game is designed in such a way that Moonlight 5 stars are basically going to be the best thing in the game. They're the big money makers for Smilegate and Super Creative, and they are balanced and geared with RTA in mind. They are RTA specialists, basically. They just are naturally better than a lot of other options, or they are hard counter / auto win in a lot of scenarios versus specific characters. If you have any specific Moonlight 5-star, you should definitely have them geared and ready to go. The only ones that I can think of that are really probably not worth it are Judge Kisei, this wonderful waifu on your screen, because she's simply underpowered right now and very easy to counter, and then Dark Corvus due to the changes in World Arena that we got in the start of Season 3. But aside from that, if you have any other Moonlight 5-star, you should probably have them geared and ready to go. Okay, and that's going to do it for the first part of the World Arena video series. If there's something you want me to cover in an upcoming part of this video series, please leave me a comment down below and let me know what it is. If you enjoyed the video, please consider leaving me a like, and if you really enjoyed it, please consider subscribing. It helps me out a ton here at this channel. And as always, you can help your friends or guildmates out by sharing this video with them if you think it will end up helping them. Tune in next time for when we talk about the draft phase specifically for World Arena. I'll be covering the pre-ban, post-ban, and everything in between. So until then, please look forward to it.